Everybody hear me? Excellent. Okay, we'd like to begin the meeting. There isn't a flag here, so we can't do the pledge. That's interesting. Yes, I could do that, except I don't have my phone ready. Okay, would you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming this evening. This is a nice venue. USCB has been very kind in allowing us to use this venue free of charge, so we thank them very much. Can you put the map up? Okay, so welcome. Lines on a map may not seem like the most exciting thing, but they're so important to our nation's democracy. Every 10 years, the federal government conducts a census to collect populations to assist in fairly administrating numerous policies and federal aid to state and local governments. We also use the data to ensure that the American people are being represented fairly from Washington to Columbia to Beaufort. Tonight, we kick off to redraw the Beaufort County Council district map. Our guest speakers are Mr. Frank Rainwater, who is the executive director, and Mr. Victor Frontroth, got that right, both from the South Carolina Revenue and District Affairs Office. They're going to present the 2020 data overlay on the county council map. This will show the population shifts and what your council will need to do to address the redistricting process. Then they will also go over the rules and factors that will need to be followed. Now, Mr. Rainwater was appointed the executive director of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office beginning with the agency's inception on July 1 of 2014. His career covers a diverse field of economic and legal experience. Prior to his appointment, Frank served as the chief economist and general counsel to the South Carolina Budget and Control Board, where he provided economic and revenue forecasts, fiscal analysis of tax law changes, and legal advice to programs. He's a native of Columbia, South Carolina, graduate of Lower Ridgeland High School, received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Clemson, Master of Arts in Economics from the University of South Carolina, and his Juris Doctorate from the University of South Carolina School of Law. And Victor serves as the Assistant Cartographer for the South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs, with a focus on precinct demographics and local redistricting. He graduated from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor of Science in Geography in 2017. He's worked at the South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs since graduation and has focused on coordination with the Census Bureau on mapping update projects leading up to the census in 2020. He's also been involved in multiple precinct updates and will be assisting with the local redistricting process in 2021. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Rainwater. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here tonight on behalf of the Office of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. Members of council, we appreciate the opportunity to come and participate and help you start with this program here. Just for some background information, Beaufort County is one of approximately 30 counties that we are assisting in some degree or other with redistricting. We're also helping about a dozen or so municipalities and a few other entities in South Carolina at this point. Just a little bit more as background, our office is the state data center for the census. We have been appointed and designated that role for a number of years. We're the official repository and conduit for census information in the state, so that's one of the reasons we're doing this. Another reason we do this is in Victor's area especially. We also maintain the official precinct maps for the General Assembly. So we work hand in hand with the General Assembly when they redefine precincts or just precincts here in your county and other counties throughout the state. We maintain those official maps. And then besides Victor and I, we've got about other statisticians and other professionals in our office. Victor and I, just the pretty faces you get to see here tonight, where there's really a team of individuals back in our office to help create these reports. So we're happy to work with you tonight. My goal tonight is really like the pregame announcer of any ball game. I'm trying to give you a little bit of hype, a little bit of facts about what the rules and requirements are. I'm kind of bringing you up to date with the status and performance and injury reports of what you got going on in your lineup. And we're going to walk through some of that, and I'm going to highlight the key features. And if it's okay with the chairman, then I will open it up. I'll be happy to answer any questions either during or afterwards. And especially if I speak and confuse you, don't hesitate to try to clarify me, because some of these concepts are easily misconstrued or misunderstood. And I like to make sure people understand that, so there's a common framework here. So I would like to congratulate Beaufort County for having such a public hearing to get started with and taking their process here, because this is, as your chairman said, a very important process, the basics of the democracy, and it requires local input, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So this report, I believe it's available online, and if not, I know it will be shortly, but I want to highlight some of the pages here in the information we're seeking to provide and impart, and knowledge to impart upon those with us and the ones viewing. So to start with, on page 2, I'm going to highlight or kind of briefly cover the main topics here, and then I'm going to go back one by one in my presentation and talk about these a bit further. But the whole purpose, or the primary driver of redistricting, is to maintain one person, one vote. And I'll explain that in a minute. But the one person, one vote concept comes from the 14th Amendment under our Equal Protection Clause. And what you want to achieve here is to make sure that your election districts represent about the same number of people. So when we talk about one person, one vote, we're talking about everybody's voice being equal in strength when it's in terms of getting elected or having an impact on the election process. Let me back up. I should clarify before we get started, because I had a question the other night. When we're talking about district lines, this doesn't affect other things. It's just how you elect your county council members. But when we're talking about one person, one vote, let's say in a simple example here, let's say you have one district that has 100 people and the adjoining district has 200 people. Well, it takes more work and more effort to get 200 to have to talk to 200 people than it does 100 people. And if 51 people is a majority in that 100 district, if they can elect somebody, they have a greater share. Those 51 people have a greater share than in the 200 district, where it takes over 100 people then to elect somebody. So the whole purpose of one person, one vote is to equalize those districts. In this case, there'd be 150 people in those districts to equalize that. So 150 voices weigh the same as 150 voices in the next district. That's the basic concept that we're working with here. It doesn't have to be exactly precise and get to that 150 person example there, but I'll talk about some of that. The second thing, that is a constitutional requirement that has been imposed upon us by our U.S. Supreme Court as a constitutional principle. The second thing that you have to do during redistricting is respect the Voting Rights Act. And that's one of the items that's had the biggest changes in the last decade. In the process that you're going through, we're emphasizing a little bit more now because of some of these court decisions. But the Voting Rights Act requires you to take notice of the minorities in your district and their voting rights and their ability or their opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. In recent Supreme Court decisions, they have outlined a three-pronged test. It's called the Jingles test, that you have to go through to make sure that you're representing or you're accounting for that minority representation. The first test of that, or the first requirement of that, is to locate the minorities, and are they compact enough? If, let's say your county is, let's just say, I'm sorry, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but let's say your county is 1/4 minority. If we lived in a perfect world and every fourth house was a minority household, there's no way you could draw a minority district because they wouldn't be compact enough. They would not be, they would be so spread out. But that's not the case. That's not the situation we live in. So you have to look at where those minority communities and where those communities are. The second thing you have to look for is do they vote as a whole? And that requires further analysis. It requires some voting analysis. And then also with that, we also do a voting analysis, see if there's racially polarized voting. So there's a division there. But we'll highlight and go through an example there. So to begin with, you've got these competing challenges. With the First Amendment, with the 14th Amendment, you have to equalize the population. And with that, the Supreme Court has said you cannot use race as a primary factor. So you've got to be race neutral when you look at the 14th Amendment, but then you got the Voting Rights Act, where you have to look at race. So it begins this balancing test. You have to look and consider all these factors. The other things beyond the constitutional and federal statutory provisions are something called traditional redistricting principles. And these are a set of traditional principles that the court recognizes and things that you have to follow through. The first one being is you have to make sure your wards are contiguous. All of your wards, or all of your councils, or all of your district, each district has to be contiguous to every other part of that district. Now you've got a lot of water around here, so you can use, in this example, under contiguousness, you can pretend the water is not there. And if those part of that district would touch without the water, or if you just kind of assume that water is very minimal, that is contiguousness. But you have to make sure all your districts are contiguous. Another issue is that you have to try to avoid splitting precincts. Now that's not always possible. You're going to have to split some precincts because you're trying to get one person, one vote. Precincts are not of equal size. They have different populations, and it depends on where they're located. But you try to avoid splitting precincts to make it easier on the voters. If you go to a polling place, it's very difficult and convoluted if they come in to vote for one person for maybe governor or your House or Senate, but then depending on their address, they got the 3 different ballots depending on which district they're in. So we try to avoid that, or your plan should try to avoid that. You have to make sure the districts, or you would like to make sure districts are geographically compact. You don't want them running too much in an odd shape or throughout the county. You're trying to keep it compact so it's easily to manage, and you get that sense of cohesion there. The most important thing that you have to do is to look at communities of interest and your core districts. Now, everything else I talked about here was equal protection and the Voting Rights Act and compactness and contiguousness. That is something we can do in Columbia. Victor can sit behind his desk, or our staff can sit behind their desk, and we can count the population, and we can balance it out to see which districts have to give up populations, which districts have to gain. We can look at the minority populations, and we can kind of work to balance that out. We can make sure they're compact, but that's not the only criteria. It involves very much that local interest or that input at the local level. It's something we don't see in Columbia, something we're not familiar with. So it's very important to have public hearings like this and have your council discuss this. What are your communities of interest, and what is the core? Those are certainly acceptable principles, not only acceptable, but they're required for you to take into analysis. Now, what I always have to tell people to understand is that you can't have too many communities of interest, otherwise it'll be impossible. You're going to draw a line somewhere, and whatever you do, you're going to split somebody's community or some particular group. But a community of interest is what y'all have to define what's important in each area. What is that core district? So especially in those districts that have to give up population, again, we can look at a map and we can take off some off the top or the bottom or the left or the right. But it's just as important to make sure that you define what is that core area, what is that community of interest. Community of interest could be a school zone, it could be a work zone, it could be a neighborhood, it could be whatever is important to that community. And that's something that just requires a lot of local input, it's not easily available on a map. and things like that. So it requires a lot of decision at the local level, and it's one of those factors that you have to take into account on how you balance this. The reason we're here tonight is that there's been a lot of court decisions over the past few years, and I think the process has kind of changed a little bit. And the emphasis is much more on taking these factors into consideration before you draw the first plan. Some of the recent court decisions I have read, the court has kind of frowned upon counties or local governments drawing a plan without explaining what their purposes are and what their criteria are. And then when they've gotten sued, the court says, well, why did you draw it this way? And they say, well, because of this community. Well, if there's nothing in the record supporting that community to begin with, the court kind of questions that or maybe a little circumspect. So again, the point is to have some involvement. Council will have to make some tough decisions, no doubt about it. When you draw the line, you're probably going to make some people happy and some people upset, but there's no perfect plan out there. But it is something that everybody has to understand and work through these basic principles to help guide you through that. How you come up with it is your decision. I say your decision, it's council's decision. You know, the way you're doing it in Beaufort County may be different than Jasper or Horry or Charleston, because it depends upon what's important to your community. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is the other big change since the last redistricting was you are no longer under pre-clearance requirements by the Department of Justice. That was ruled unconstitutional in the Shelby versus Holder case by the Supreme Court. And what that means is last time when you adopted your plan, once you adopted it, you had to submit it to the Department of Justice for approval. And if the Department of Justice approved it, it was considered okay, ready to go. That requirement for South Carolina to submit the plans has been ruled unconstitutional. So while that is good, it puts you a little bit more in control of what you're doing. You don't have to get a second opinion. Once you adopt the plan, once council adopts the plan, that's it, unless you get sued. But the downside of that is if you had that approval by DOJ, it made it more difficult for somebody to sue you. If somebody wanted to challenge your case, you could say, well, the Department of Justice approved it, you know, go argue with them. That fallback has been removed. So again, that's why it's more especially important for council to be aware of some of this criteria and think through this, because you can make it difficult to get challenged. The better you do the plan, the more difficult it is. If somebody wants to challenge your plan, the burden of proof is upon them. They've got to have a strong reason. They can't have a right reason just because I liked it better. And your reason is it's going back to these criteria. If you set the right criteria and you stick to that, you've got a much better chance to defend any suit that arises from that. So that's kind of the general outline we're going to talk about, but let's talk about some of the specifics here in Beaufort County. What we have here is the data showing the current 2020 census count by each district. We have the table here on the left, and on the right we have a graph. Just kind of highlight for you in big picture the graph on the right. The ideal district or the equal representation is that red line there. Ideally, you want every district to be around 17,011 people. And we've got those districts highlighted. If gray districts, that means you've got too many people in that district. You need to move some of those people out of those gray districts into those districts with the blue area. Excuse me, the blue districts. Those districts are below the average. So going back to one person, one vote, you would like to get everybody as close to that red line as possible. So when we talk about the statistics here a little bit more, let's just pick out District 1. District 1 has, I'm trying to make sure people can hear me. District 1 has 13,876 people. They are about 3,000, a little over 3,000 below that. So you're starting to get some sizable shifts here. That percentage deviation is 18%. That means they are underrepresented by 18% from the ideal. And let's pay attention to that percent change or that percent column, because that's what I want to talk about as far as this criteria of one person, one vote. So District 1 is 18% under. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to step over. I can't see from the side. So District 1 is 18% under, and then District 7 is 30% over. That's your large. So District 7 there, I said is 37% over. Oh, thank you. Is this? I like to walk. Is this on? Okay, thank you. I'm a pacer, so. So you see here, District 7 is 37% over. They've got 6,000 people that have to come out of District 7. And the trick is that y'all gonna go through, how do you start separating those communities? What part of that district do you start shifting and how you do that? But the way deviation is defined by the courts is that the deviation is basically a range. It's between your district that has the highest percentage over and the district with the lowest percentage over. So when I look here, District 7 has got 37%. They're the highest district over. You take that 37% and you add it to that 18% under, algebraically, remove the algebraic sign, add them together, you get 57%. So you're out of compliance because your deviation is 15%. The court standard is you have to be 10% or less. If you're at 9%, that may be okay, but you can still be subject to challenge. If somebody wants to challenge you on that and they can draw a better plan that gets it to 5 or 4 or 3%, you are at risk on that. So when I talk about 10%, what often gets confused is that your total deviation, your total range between the highest and lowest cannot be more than 10%. Some counties, the State General Assembly, the Senate plan is adopting a 5% deviation, and that's our recommendation to shoot for 5%, but you may find 2% is okay. You may say that no, 8% is kind of what we need in our county. So when I say, let's say a 5% deviation, that means your highest district, the range in there has to be no more than 5%. So you could have one district that is 2.5% too high and another district 2.5% too low. Or you could have one district that's 3% too high and then the lowest district would be 2%. So it's a very tight range there to try to keep, that's the standard there, you gotta try to keep this population equal. That's usually the easiest step, kind of setting a target there. How close do we want to get to one person, one vote? Well, I will tell you when the courts get involved, and in the couple cases we've been involved since I've been doing this, the courts just go basically to zero. I mean, they equalize it. There may be a one person different, but they don't worry about 10%. They tend to go straight to a 0% and make it very tight. So that's just for information. So when we see this, you've got a lot of growth in some areas. Some areas did not grow as fast. So you've got districts, let's see, districts 2, 6, 7, and 9 have to give up population, and all the other districts gain population. So to maintain one person, you've got to shift a lot of people around, and that'll be part of the challenge that you have. So again, these are the maps here, your current maps, and how they look after this is the responsibility of council. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Voting Rights Act, and these are some of the statistics that come into account when you look at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. You have to look over here at this column, second from the end, that percent NH DOJ black, that's the Department of Justice definition of black, and it shows that racial minority, what the Constitution is, or excuse me, what the composition is in each district. You've got one district, District 1, with a 53%, that's considered a majority minority district, and then District 3 is 41%, and that's considered a minority influence district. The courts, in looking at this, they really look at voting age population as well as just absolute population. But to keep to be able to have, for a minority group to elect somebody, you try to keep that in the 50%. You don't want it to drop below 50, or really much below 51, 52. You don't want to get too much above 60 because then you're starting to pack the voters into one area and it starts to dilute the ability in other areas. But that's what you have to pay attention to. So when you're moving people around, and it may be difficult depending upon the compactness and geography of your minority communities, your total population here at the bottom, about 15% of your community, of your county is minority. but they seem to be concentrated in 2 districts. So that's something you have to pay attention to. When you move people around, be careful. I mean, I haven't looked at the maps in detail. I don't know where around District 1, where the communities are, but you need to try to, in order to comply with the Voting Rights Act in Section 2, you need to pay attention to those percentages as you go through that and kind of make sure you're not diluting those votes too much. Sometimes population growth is what you're experiencing here. The white population is growing faster than the black population. That's just a natural evolution or consequence of time. You know, if this continues, pattern continues in the next 10 years, it'll get more difficult to maintain this, but this is something that you have to consider. You have to define what's appropriate in working through that. Where are those communities? How do you draw those communities together? So again, just going here with the Voting Rights Act, again, you look at the same column here, the percent, the voting age population, that's VAP, voting age population, the percent black, 52, 39%. So you see in that District 3 where the population was higher, but the voting age population was lower. So those are just some factors you have to be aware of as you go through this to help try to watch out. Well, you have to reply with the Voting Rights Act, but those are the key statistics as you go through this to make sure you're representing that requirement. So just to kind of summarize here, before you start the process here, it's best for council to adopt a resolution to state these things, what they're trying to do, what are their objectives here, and sometimes you have to talk it's best to talk amongst yourselves. But we recommend that you adopt a resolution and say, hey, we're going to try to maintain a deviation of less than 10%, 5%, 6%, or whatever it is. So that way, when you're drawing the plans, there's some guidance that the community and the council has agreed upon. You need a statement that you're going to respect the Voting Rights Act, and you're going to work to the best that you can to, within the numbers that are given there, to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And then you need to talk about making sure that everybody recognizes you're going to draw the districts contiguously here. You're going to try to minimize the number of voting precincts. I wouldn't try to put a number on that. That's just something, once you draw a plan, that's usually the question. Well, how many precincts did I split? And then how can we maybe tweak that? And are they going to be geographically compact? And again, the important part here is about you respecting your communities of interest. If there's a community that's very important, you may want to consider mentioning that or highlighting that. You don't have to, but the more specific you can put in your resolution or talk about and document. This is about documentation to help support the record. So if you get challenged later, you've got a solid record, to stand on. But it also helps you communicate with the public what's important. What are you hearing from? What are the communities telling you? What are you seeing there? So that's the basic principles you have to go through. At this point, Mr. Chairman, unless there's questions, that's all that I have, but I'll be glad to answer any questions. And if I just may ask, maybe if council can go first.
Okay, before we go to the questions, as a result of this meeting, council will now begin the process of setting a timeline, a public hearing schedule, and comments from our public to consider the options of a new map. Once those options have been identified and public comment provided, council will then decide which is the best option and send that packet to the South Carolina Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. And upon completion of that process, South Carolina will draft and enact the new district maps. So now it's your opportunity to ask any questions. This presentation will be available tomorrow. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Rainwater. You said that we were no longer under the Department of Justice guidelines. Is it still possible for us to seek an opinion of the DOJ in regards to any plan that we have?
That's a good question. I really don't know your answer, but let me share this with you. The Department of Justice guidelines, what they looked at was a Section 5 analysis, which looked at more issues like retrogression in lowering that percentage of your minority voters. The Supreme Court decisions now have shifted to a Section 2 analysis. So it's probably worth a call to them to ask them, but I don't know how much information, since their role has been diminished in this and the standard has changed. I'm not sure what type of response they would give you, but I don't think they would, I think they would welcome a call. Thank you.
Other questions? I'm sure as we get into this, there will be more questions. Yes. The microphone will be coming to you momentarily.
In seeking to be sure that the minority communities of interest are recognized, for example, in this county, there seem to be two that are really very heavily minority, way more than the population. If there's such a zeal to do that, it seems like it is not compatible with communities of interest, and so you sort of guarantee that the majority wins in non-competitive districts because you've tried to protect the minority. And just by analogy, it appears that South Carolina has kind of done that with having 6 of 7 congressional seats represented by majorities and only 1 minorities, when it appears that that district has been so drawn to be assured a minority wins that one, but they cannot win anything else. And in other words, a principle of competitiveness within a community would seem to be a valid principle here, to have a robust representation.
Yeah, well, one, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I'm not involved in the House or congressional. We're here and we help local governments. Yeah, I'm just, yeah. But no, yeah, that's why the Supreme Court has laid out this balancing test in Section 2, and that's why it's something you have to consider. I really wish this was so simple, where we could put all these decisions into a program and run it and it will spit out one answer. But when the court looks at it, you have to look at that compactness issue. Where are the minorities, and is it sufficient to draw a district there? You get into situations where governments have gone wrong, is that they will take a strong minority area, but divide that into 3 districts and split up that voting strength. That's what the courts don't like. The other end of that spectrum is they will reach too far around the county and put 2 minorities together. So it's really a data-driven decision. You have to look at that. But again, like the courts have said, race is a factor. It cannot be the primary factor. But you've got all these primary factors you have to look at. So it is a balancing test that you have to consider, and all these principles. And you may have to go higher, a little bit lower on the deviation to help communities of interest, or one of these other factors. But that's why it's so important for everybody to understand kind of where the bright lines are and then where the gray areas are on how you put this together. Mr. Chairman, before I forget, if I may just you said 2 things. One, make sure county council on the nose. This requires 3 readings. I don't know if you had said that. It's like an ordinance and not a resolution. So it does take 3 readings. All the counties, your filing season opens about the middle of March. So the sooner you can get this done before March, the better, just to help everybody understand.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why we said we're going to set a timeline, a schedule, public input to ensure that this is an open and well thought out process. Other questions that you might have?
First, I want
Mayor.
to thank Mr. Rainwater for being here, and thanks the county for setting up this opportunity to hear the presentation. So in the city, we had a decreasing amount of minorities, but a pretty dramatic increase in the amount of non-minorities. So as we start to sort of look at the county and draw these new district lines, is there some grace for minority districts in terms of that deviation? Because it seems like it's going to be awfully hard to keep a minority district at this, at that 17,000 number and the deviation along with all the other districts when we've got minorities sort of moving out and non-minorities moving in. So again, is there a larger amount of deviation that's provided to be able to keep a minority district intact. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but
I mean, your deviation has to be less than 10%. And I think that's a factor that the county can consider. Is it more important to have a 9% deviation to help, if that's needed to help with a minority area? If you can't get enough population there, do you make it a little bit lower? That's just one of the balancing factors that y'all have to consider. It has to be considered each local jurisdiction.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can you put the population by district back up?
Okay. Can we put that slide back, that one right there? Go ahead. You have a question?
Oh, I have one question and one comment. The first question is, when you describe minority, what does that mean? I'm Chinese migrant. Am I majority? Am I white? Am I minority or what?
That is a separate category. We did not list that for space, but the Asian community is in the 1% and 2% for this county. Hispanics are a little bit larger in area, but they're not large. They're not as large as the black population. And what I've looked at the map is that when you look at those communities, they're kind of interrelated closer with the black community. They don't seem to be large enough to constitute or to qualify for a majority-minority district. But we have that available. We can provide that to council if you'd like to see the racial makeup of all the races and ethnicities.
That would be great, because this is my second part. Apologizes to the council people. It's more comment instead of question, because seems like you have the Constitution says race shouldn't be considered as a part of decision, but then you have the letter part says Voting Rights Act and also community of interest. So my comment is community interest. What does that really mean? Because minorities are not all monolithic. Because if you say, okay, group all the Chinese together in Chinatown, will we gain more power? No, because mainland Chinese actually tend to be more conservative because they experienced communism than Chinese who were born in America. So my question is for the town council, if by skin color, then why District 1, which you have a district councilman who's black, yet the population is declining? So that doesn't seem to make sense either, because we're losing more black population in the black-run, council-run district over the past decade. So the key question for me is for council to consider is that community of interest should really be not race, not rich or poor, but should bring us together. Because we all want better schools, lower taxes, safer community, more job opportunities, and cleaner environment. To me, those are communities of interest. We need to unite as people, and we should not be used as a pawn by the politicians in Washington, D.C., who wants to separate people among races, among economic status, because in America, it really should be we the people versus the people who are the ruling class. So I just want to make that clear in terms of community of interest. And I will come back again if you think that's going to be on the record for public to speak. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? No other questions? Okay. Once again, this information will be available on the county website tomorrow. All of the county council members will be receiving a copy of this. We will begin the process as quickly as we can. Time marches on. We have to have 3 public readings of this. By ordinance, we'll have several hearings on this, lots of input before we finally decide on what we think is the best way of setting up our district. So thank you all for coming this evening. Yes?
Sorry, sir, I just had a thought. The county council is putting the districts together, correct? Hold on, I need to get you. The county council is doing the work of redistricting, correct?
That's correct.
Now, are you inviting anyone to assist with the redistricting that is not a member of county council?
We're going to have several public input sessions on what we do and how we do it. This is not going to be done behind closed doors. This will be open, discussed several times before a decision is finally made. So
Yes.
you will have numerous opportunities to weigh in.
Well, but that is not exactly the question, but thank you. I understand that. Thank you for taking so much extra time to let so many people have input. The question is there anyone in the final decision-making process who is not a member of county council? So we will talk to our representative and say, hey, I want this, I want that, I want this. But ultimately, the county council person will vote, assumably based on the input of those that spoke with him or her.
Mm-hmm.
However, if they have an agenda, then speaking with them will not allow influence. See, so what I'm saying is there an outside agency watching the process, like the League of Women Voters?
Everybody's going to be able to see exactly what we do. This is all going to be televised.
While you're doing it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that you'll have open forums where people can comment.
Yes.
But you will not have any type of outside expert advisories.
We will seek whatever
Advisors.
means we need to do the decision, but you have to understand, you're duly elected officials. This Beaufort County Council has the obligation to set the map.
Correct. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're
Sorry
welcome.
to take so much time.
Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is really simple. Will we have an opportunity to also have this south of the Broad meetings public, or is everything going to be kept in north of the Broad?
Oh, no, we will have this, I would hope, in several places. You know, the beauty of it is wherever we meet, it doesn't matter where we meet, as long as the population gets to see, hear, and have input, that's a good thing. But to have it publicly in, you know, the city of Beaufort, city of Bluffton, Hilton Head, wherever, we'll take that into consideration, because obviously we want as much input as we possibly can. Mr. Flewellen.
And can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. The last time we did redistricting in Beaufort County, the state presented to us a draft proposal that met all the technical requirements, and then County Council had an opportunity to adjust the map according to communities of interest, et cetera, et cetera. And I assume that the same process will be done this time, that the State Department of Revenue.
Yes. Yeah, I have spoken to Mr. Rainwater and assured him that we will be leaning on him going through the process to assist us.
Thank you. And so this draft report will be coming out tomorrow. I'm wondering if the draft map will also be revealed, and what kind of timeline we'll have for that.
Yes, thank you. And I was trying to clarify that in my presentations. Because of the changes in the Supreme Court decisions, I don't feel it's appropriate for us to draw a map, even as a starting point, till y'all decide on this criteria. Again, our office and our predecessor who done this and was known nationally for doing this, you know, pretty familiar with the Department of Justice, and he knew what it required to get through the Department of Justice. You're somewhat in uncharted territories with the recent Supreme Court decisions, and in looking at those decisions, I just felt it was better. Y'all need to have a discussion and tell us first, or however whoever's going to do this, to decide what is the deviation that you work for, what is your community of interest. And so I think it's better for y'all to go a little bit slower before that first plan is out there, because sometimes those first plans cause too much confusion, and I don't want to do anything unintentionally to make the job harder for council. But I think it's just important for y'all to agree on these principles in advance before that first plan is drawn, because then you got the opportunities to tweak it there. So it's just because of the court decision, we're doing something a little bit different. But certainly whether we're drawing the plan or whatever, it will evolve back and forth in discussing on what's good and bad about it.
Okay. Did that help you, Brian? Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Well, first I want to say thank you for hosting the meeting in the city of Beaufort. So County Council has an election coming up in November of 2022. Primaries are in June. I believe the filing for candidates is sometime around March. I assume this process has to be completed in advance of that 2022 election. So is there a timeline for, I mean, going through 3 readings of council takes a little time, the public hearings. What are your thoughts about timing and how this sort of plays out over the coming months?
That's why we have done this now, so that we can go back at our next county council meeting and begin to set the timeline and say, it has to be done by this date. In order to get it done by this date, we must set up the following. And that's what we're going to do, so that everybody is aware of how many meetings we may have to have, how many times we may have to meet, how many places we may have to meet at. But, you know, as Mr. Rainwater said, our first thing is going to be to set up those criteria that starts the process, but also setting the goalpost. We have to get over it by this date. And how do we do that? So that's what our charge is, and that's why we're here tonight, starting it now. Any others? Okay, so thank you very much for coming, and we will be in touch with you, obviously, many times.